Dustin's really good
Welcome.
at this part.
I am great at this part. This is the best part ever. Welcome to the podcast, everybody. See, it's just awkward and weird to start a podcast. But we got Blu Tidwell with us, who's crinkling a package. I don't know. I'll probably try to edit that out or not. You don't know.
Yeah, I don't think you're going to be able to.
You don't know.
Yeah, it's stuck. It's on there.
And so we got Blu with us this week. He's actually the pastor at Rocky Creek Baptist Church. He's got some degrees from an institution somewhere that I totally forgot about, but I'm pretty sure he's a smart dude. I know he is because he is actually, me and Caleb are both deacons at his church. I actually work for Blu and we're good friends. And so this is going to be...
You don't even know where I went to seminary, Dustin?
I'm pretty sure it was Southwestern, right?
Yeah, there it goes. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Maybe I'll just throw out some, like, is there a Northwestern seminary? That first question, Blu, is there just like random directional seminaries?
No, there is Southern, and there is. Yeah, that's all I got is Southern. And there's Midwestern,
Okay.
and then there's Golden Gate.
Midwestern.
My question is, what's in the middle? Like, what are they basing those directions off of?
I'm not really sure because in Fort Worth it's Southwestern, so we're further southwest than Richmond, maybe. I don't know, because Richmond is where the headquarters are for a lot of that stuff.
Oh, maybe that's it. Okay.
You know, Caleb, you should start a seminary and just call it Central Seminary. That's it.
Yeah, there
That's
we go.
all it is. And you could put it right in the middle of Texas. And it could be Caleb's Central Seminary.
Listen,
Right here. You heard it here first.
I'm going out on a limb right here and saying seminary is not really that important. So, you know, the best part
That's
about
definitely
seminary,
in the intro right there. You're going to hear that. Welcome to, on this episode of Seminary is Not Really That Important. I'm going to do it.
it's not. Well, I mean, the best part. What they say, the best part about seminary is finding out all the stuff that you didn't need to know. Because it's like there's this idea that said, "Ooh, if I went to seminary, I would know these things," and then you go through it and you're like, "Okay, none of that stuff really mattered." So.
That's kind of
All
like
right.
any degree where you go to college and then you're like, you actually get the job and you're like, man, I didn't really use much of that.
Right. You
Why
go
didn't
to
they-
learn all
Why
the
didn't
things.
they tell us X, Y, and Z? Yeah.
Yeah.
Normally we start off with dad jokes, but apparently we talked about seminaries for a couple minutes. Hey, Blu, do you have a dad joke for us?
I am a dad, actually, of 3 kids. So, of course, I've got dad jokes. So, let me see. What about this one? Have you ever, you know, the one, if you're American when you go into the bathroom and you're Chinese when you come out of the bathroom, what are you when you're in the bathroom?
I know this, but I don't
I've heard
wanna
you say this. What
Wow.
is it?
Like, well, you've heard me say it before?
I'm pretty sure
I think
I've
I
heard
have. I
you
don't
say this
remember,
one.
but I don't remember, so it's okay.
European.
European. That's right. Didn't
What's
you
your-
say that in one of your sermons?
It's very likely.
You
I
may
don't
have.
remember that, but probably. Yeah.
European.
So.
That's a good
Got another one.
That's a good
right
one.
here. Got another one, Caleb. Ask me if I'm an orange.
Are you an orange?
No.
Okay.
Okay. I got it. That was all right. Way to go. Right there. Yeah.
That's my dad jokes. There it is. That's all I got.
Oh.
That's a good one. That's a good no. I'm not. The awkward pause is what makes that one funny.
Yeah,
Right
that
there.
was good.
Exactly what pushes that one over the edge. So, all right.
Hey, okay, I've got one here. Since both of y'all are carpenters or do some carpentry, what is the best way to carve wood?
How?
I don't know.
Whittle by whittle.
Oh. Whittle by
Okay.
whittle.
I don't like it.
I totally don't have a dad joke. It's fine. I'm just off my game here, you know. Blu already took the best one though. Sorry, Caleb. I've got to give it to the orange joke. I'm going to give the orange joke as one of the top dad jokes we've heard on this podcast.
Are you
I'm going to
serious
say
right now?
right there.
It's my
That
whole
orange joke
life.
was a good one.
I've used that joke my whole life, and nobody ever gets it. So, Dustin, you're actually the very first person to ever appreciate the
I
orange.
appreciate it. Yeah, probably number 2. I'll say the number 2 here, just since we're talking about it, is Caleb tried to make one about a magical Labrador, but he couldn't say the word, so he was like, couldn't say a labracadabrador.
That was a good
or
one
something.
too. It didn't.
I
It
heard
didn't.
you.
jab.
I heard
But
you
that's
juggle
got to be
through
the best one because the delivery on that one was just it was,
It was
great,
terrible.
Caleb.
It was terrible.
I know, but that's what makes it a good dad joke.
It's fine. That's why they're dad jokes. You get to practice
Yeah.
them on kids, and they don't care.
Yes. Yeah. That's
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, they are. Well, we are a dad podcast or a theology podcast or a hunting podcast, outdoors, something. We also talk about weird stuff too. So it all works. But I guess really had a lot of questions for you, Blue, and a lot of like different directions and thoughts on this one. But what were you thinking about jumping in first, Caleb? Uh,
Basically, I think it'd be a good time for Blue to introduce himself and tell us just a little bit. I put on our outline for Blue to tell us his whole life story, but that may take too long. So, just maybe a quick little overview of
all
who
of it.
you are, of everything. Yeah, who you are, some of your missionary work, which is pretty interesting. So, and kind of how you ended up being our preacher, maybe.
Well, let's see. The highlights of my life were I was, born in Lubbock, Texas, raised out in West Texas, and met my wife out there and got married quite young. Now that I look back on it, of course, at the time I felt like we were super old, but we were 19 and 20 years old, and got married and went to Texas A&M University for my college degree. And then while I was there, God kind of tricked me, I think, into being on the mission field is the way that I like to think of it, because I got a degree in speech communication, which is just the easiest thing that I could do. And so I got ready to graduate, and I told Darby, my wife, I'm like, I can't do anything with my life. Like, I can, with a degree in speech, I can take orders at a drive-through and I can do it really well, but that's about it. And so we're trying to think through what to do as a young married couple with no kids. And she's like, "Hey, there's a church here in College Station that's going on a 3-month mission trip down to Mexico, and why don't we just join that? And we'll go with them, and then we'll come back and we'll figure it out." So we tried to do that. It all fell through after the first meeting, but by that time we were looking at other mission opportunities, and we found the International Mission Board, which at the time was allowing people to go. They would pay for your ticket, give you a place to live and everything, and they would send you on mission trips for 3 to 6 months. And we're like, we're doing that. And so we went through the whole process with that, had to make sure we were theologically sound, all of that. And we got accepted, and we went to the candidate conference. And the first thing they said was, "Hey, budget cutbacks, every assignment now is 2 to 3 years." And so I had never been on a mission trip in my life. And so my very first mission trip was to Zambia, Africa for 2 years, where we worked with youth, and then we did some church planting work, and we did work in the schools. And while I was there, just kind of, I went thinking, man, I'm never going to be in ministry. People have told me that my whole life, like growing up in school. "Oh, man, Blue, you're going to be a preacher one day. You're going to be in ministry." I'm like, absolutely not. But then when you go on your first mission trip, man, it changes you. And so afterwards, I couldn't imagine not being in ministry somehow. So came back, went to Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary, just not because I needed to, because I don't think anyone needs to go to seminary. Billy Graham, for instance, didn't go to seminary. But while I was on the mission field, someone told me, "Hey, Blue, you don't have to do this, but it will make you a better minister wherever you go, whatever you do." So I was like, all right. And plus, because the president of the seminary said, "Hey, Blue, I'll pay for your seminary if you go."
That's
So
always a plus. That's
that
a big
was,
plus.
yeah, that was nice. He didn't actually follow through on it. He paid for one semester because they wanted me to say I was going to go back with the International Mission Board, which I wasn't completely sure that we were going to do that. But while we were in seminary, God opened up the door for us to be able to start an orphanage back in the same area where we were working. And so we went independently of the International Mission Board and Southern Baptist Sending Agency, and spent 8 years doing ministry work there. During all that time, 3 kids were born, and those kids are now 19, 18, and 16 years old. So it goes quick, fellas. I just want you to know. And came back to the States whenever they were about junior high age, because we raised our kids on the mission field in the culture. And we really viewed them as being part of our ministry. So we took them with us. We put them in there so that they would learn the language, and they were very much Zambian. So we're like, they're going to have to be able to survive in the United States if they go back for college or whatever. We want them to be able to live wherever God calls them and to function well. And so we came back to the States, and Rocky Creek was looking for a youth minister. So I took that job there and was doing youth and music for a while. And then when our pastor, Brother Rick, left us as orphans, kind of just felt like it'd be good to step into that role right there to serve the church. And so never viewed myself actually being a pastor, but here I am trying to
Here
figure
you
it
are,
out.
a pastor. Another weird little side note, the reason why Rocky Creek was looking for a youth pastor was because this guy was
That's
the youth
right.
pastor
Yes.
and I left.
Yeah. And
I
so whenever I
left.
show up to Rocky Creek, you know how it is when a new youth minister shows up. The older youth in the youth group hate you. They despise you, like because you're the new guy and you don't do things like the other guy. And so I show up, and the very first thing, one of the girls she was a senior in the youth group. She's like, "Well, Dustin, he's so much stronger than you, Blu." That's actually what she said. That was one of my very first conversations with her. And so whenever I got to meet Dustin for the very first time, I told him, I said, "Bro, we got to do a bull moose competition or something." So we got down in the church office floor and we did a bull moose competition. So
That is
and
awesome.
I lost.
Who was, I was about to say, and who was stronger? I mean,
Oh, as a matter of fact, I found that picture on my phone 2 days ago. So I don't know why
oh,
it was there.
but it was
That is
there.
awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, so you kind of
before me.
Yeah. So you kind of glossed over one thing just a little bit. You started an orphanage.
Yes.
That's a pretty big thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It kind of is, but here's what it was. We're on the mission field and we're doing church planning work. We started out working with youth, and we did True Love Waits programs in different schools, and then we did church planting, which was very different. Number one, I was just, gosh, at the time, I suppose I was 22 years old. So I wasn't very old and had never thought about what's required for church planting work. How do you disciple people? How do you train pastors? Which was what I was doing, was training pastors at 22 years old. So it didn't go very well. Let's put it that way. And so like for instance, we had a church in our town, and there's a man who was coming. He had a wife who was blind, and he had a young child, and he was coming. He made a profession of faith. He seemed to be growing in his faith, and I was just like, man, y'all, here I am killing this missionary thing, dude. I'm doing so well. And he was there, and after several months of coming to church faithfully, he came to me after church one day and he said, "Hey, Blu, I got a problem, man. I've just been sick. I'm coughing, and I'm coughing up blood." And so I'm like, "Bro, if you're coughing up blood, you need to go to the doctor. Like, here, let me give you some money, get you to the hospital, nearest hospital." And so he went to the hospital, and he came back and he said, "They told me I have low blood." So that's what they said. "You don't have enough blood." So he said they gave him some pills. And I'm like, okay, this does not sound like very good healthcare, but whatever. And so a couple of weeks later, he shows up to church and he is so excited, man. He's like, "Blu, I'm feeling so much better." And I'm like, "The pills worked? I mean, was it actually something?" He said, "Oh no, I never took those at all. What I did was I went to a witch doctor." And he told me, he said, what happened was somebody had cursed me, and they sent a bird into my house at night, and it came and it put fingernails and hair inside of my chest. And so he got them out. And I'm like, what do you mean he got them out? And he said, "Well, look." And he lifts up his shirt. This is right after church, and there is a hole cut in his chest, like a gaping hole.
Oh my gosh.
And they had, in the bush of Africa, had taken something out of his chest. Now, I'm not a doctor, y'all, right? I don't pretend to be one, but I do know this. If you cut somebody open and start pulling things out of their chest, it's not going to end well. Like it's insane. But so, and then about a week later, he died. So, and left his wife, who's blind, and his child, who was about 10 years old or something, as an orphan. And I was thinking to myself, I'm like, man, there's got to be like a better way of something, because it's like when people make a profession of faith, and this is a lot of the way that it is in third world countries and stuff, there people will want to cling on to something. They'll make a profession of faith and seem to be growing in their faith. But then whenever they encounter any kind of difficulty or setback or something, they're going to go back to the things that they've always been taught from the time they were young, which is, hey, you got a problem, you go to the witch doctor.
Mm-hmm.
So even then, before I went to seminary and we had 4 years here in the States, even before God opened up the door, we dreamed about, hey, what if there was a way that we could take children, raise them from the time they're young, teach them about the gospel so that they can then go and be like missionaries to their own people. So that's where it kind of started with stories like that and different things. And then God just opened up the means for us to be able to go and do it. And we did it. So.
I got a question. You told me to raise my hand earlier, so I raised my hand.
Yeah.
This is normally when the podcast starts to go rogue because I've got a question. You talk about like in that story how he goes back to what they know, right? How do you I guess how do you as a pastor, do you see that like here in the States? Do you maybe not necessarily with, one of the deacons going to see a witch doctor or something? I can make that example because I'm one of the deacons, you know. But it's like you're not going to see it like that extreme, but do you see that in some way, shape, or form here in the States? And how do you combat that as a pastor, or how did you combat that
That's
back
a
then?
that's a good question. So here's what I'm thinking about that. Yes, you do see that in the States because children are so shaped by what they're exposed to in their environment that are around. So it is really hard to come out of that. And so you'll take a child who gets their value and self-worth from certain things, they will carry that through them for their whole life. So if you got a child who has to perform in order to feel like they please their parents or something like that, then they're going to grow up and it is very hard for them to shake off the mindset of the fact that their identity is found in what they can do for others and how good they are at things. So I think that's, those things happen, and it will happen in different ways within the States. One of the things that I think is especially on my mind right now as I'm looking at the culture of the United States is the fact that children growing up who are now adults, they have nothing solid to hold on to determine who they are and where their value comes from, or to determine what is right and wrong and why is it right and wrong. Like that's a big thing to know. What determines if something is going to be morally acceptable to do or not, right? And so all of that foundation stuff happens whenever kids are young, and it makes it so much easier for believers in their adult years if they have a solid foundation for stuff, which is why the Bible will say, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he's old, he'll not depart from it.
All right, I like that. I like that answer. Yeah.
Yeah.
Solid response right there. Yeah.
All right. So one thing I've kind of got as far as like training kids in the way they should go. So we're kind of, our kids are 9, 7, and 4. So we're a little ways behind you, but teaching kids how to appreciate who they are and what they have. Now you said, one thing you kind of mentioned on earlier was you treat your kids as part of your mission as far as, and you said one thing one time when you came back to the States, you kind of treated it as, hey, we're about to go on a mission to the States with your kids, and you kind of train them on that. And one thing we kind of do with our kids is we're like, we're going to send you to Africa if you don't like, so you can learn to appreciate what you have. Is that a good thing, number one? Or how should we go about that maybe? And then tell us a little bit about raising your kids in Africa versus raising your kids in America. And that's a lot, but go.
That's a good question. We actually, interestingly enough, used to tell our kids whenever they're young and growing up, hey, we're in Africa, eat your food because there's starving children in America.
Oh, that's awesome.
We tell them that all the time, and so that they think that that's the way the saying goes. So just whatever you're exposed to. But yeah, I do think, and I skipped over this part when I came back, I was so tired of being labeled the missionary. You come back and it's like this celebrity status almost within churches. And we'd go to churches and we would speak, and we'd go to Sunday school classes and nobody would say anything because they're terrified they're going to say something wrong in front of the missionary. And I'm like, y'all, we're just like normal people, like everybody else. It's just we happen to live overseas, right? All we're trying to do is follow the Lord. So when we came back to the States, I did not want to be on staff anywhere. I was thinking, you know what? What I want to do is I want to go plug myself into a church and help how I can and be a carpenter. And I want everybody there to know that, oh, think of me as, oh, there's Blue. He's just a guy raising his kids. But in reality, I'm like this top secret super spy missionary, to the Texas people. So I did, and I feel like it was going pretty well, but at the same time, I also wanted a lot more control over the type of youth ministry my kids were exposed to. So that's how we came to do that. But yeah, we made an intentional decision for our children whenever we were on the mission field to say they are going to be part of the ministry. They're missionaries. They are followers of Christ. Once they made their profession of faith, they were followers of Christ, and so God expects them to use their lives to honor Him. It's actually kind of a controversial statement among missionaries, because a lot of missionaries will tell their kids, oh no, honey, you're not a missionary. Mommy and daddy are missionaries and we're doing this. You are just a child. Which I get what they're trying to say is, look, don't put all that pressure on yourself of, oh, you have to save the world or whatever. But I think that comes from a misunderstanding of what missionaries actually do. But what we wanted our children to do is say, hey, you are part of the culture. You're going out there, you're sharing the gospel with other people as well. So it worked out really well for us, especially I think because we hosted so many missionary teams that, and when somebody comes on a short-term mission trip, they're fired up and excited about sharing the gospel. And so our kids grew up thinking this is normal Christianity. They would have churches coming and people there, and they see them. All they want to do is share about what God's doing in their life and talk about the Bible and share with others. And so our kids kind of grew up with that mindset of, oh, this is what normal Christianity is like, even though within the States it's not normal that way.
I think a good statement there is probably is what Christianity should be.
Right. Yes.
Yeah.
The way that they say it in a fancy way is what is normal in Christianity is so subnormal that if anything is actually normal, then it's considered abnormal. I don't know. There's a better way of saying it than that. But if you're just a normal Christian, you're considered abnormal. That's what it is. Because, we have such a low view of what we should be doing in the States.
Interesting.
Now, our kids, though, to answer your question about raising our kids there, it was awesome. And they would climb trees. And they had games where they'd get up in trees with the Zambian children that they learned to grow up with and stuff. And then their games were like to try to say, how many trees can we get to before we have to come down? Like, so that you're just climbing from one tree to another. And then to make it a little more interesting, the other kids would sit down on the ground and they would throw rocks at you to try to knock you out of the tree. So
I'm reenacting that game. I'm reenacting that game in my yard.
See if your kids can do it.
I want to play that game.
And there was a lot of benefits to that I don't think we would have been smart enough to have picked up on if we had just raised our kids here in the States. Like, for instance, dealing with cell phones and tablets and gaming stuff. We just didn't have that. Our kids didn't have that. They didn't grow up with that at all. And so it wasn't like they felt like they needed to have it. And now having teenagers and working with youth and seeing the effects that tablets and phones have on kids, if I could go back and redo it, I would be like, no, my kids cannot have anything at all, right? Because there's nothing good that comes from it. But I don't think I probably would have exposed my children to technology a lot sooner if we had been here in the States. So I'm very thankful that God allowed us to raise kids in.
So what age now would you say would be good for, say, a young child to have a cell phone or something like that?
Okay.
20. Well, I'm thinking like 20 years old.
So here's the way that I would answer that. Number one, we gave our kids cell phones. Our oldest, whenever he got into 8th grade, he got one. Which seemed to work out pretty well. Then the others was in 7th grade. I think we wound up with the 13 years old was whenever they got it. But here's what I would say to parents right here is, whenever you feel like your child is equipped to be able to handle the worst of humanity with all the pedophiles and all of the bullying that goes on and all of the drug references and all of the sexual innuendos and things that are going, when you feel like your child is ready to be thrown in with a group of child molesters, like, or something, then it's a good time to give them a phone.
Yeah, so like
that is
30 now, like
35
yeah,
maybe.
yeah,
Listen, I mean,
Blue, I'm not old enough to have a cell phone.
yeah, me neither.
I mean, take that for whatever you think. Yeah, it's probably not a very practical answer, because I don't know that any parent would actually do that. If I were to, in a perfect world, I would probably say maybe at 16. But before then, the argument is always, well, they need something, because they're going to games and athletics, and they need to do coordinating schedules and stuff. So, which you can have a dumb phone to do all those things just with texting and calling. It's the access to the internet. And I would encourage parents just to sit down and make a list of all of the advantages for your child having a cell phone and all of the disadvantages, and then just pray about it and weigh it and see. But you're going to have a hard time coming up with advantages.
Well,
And you have to have that conversation with those kids too, because like you said, they're going to go to school and they're going to be around those other kids that have their parents have zero idea what they're doing on those phones and what they're looking at and what they're seeing and talking about. So you also have to have those conversations with those kids about, hey, you're going to be exposed to these things. And that's a whole nother aspect to it as well.
Oh,
well,
yeah. And go ahead.
Also, because we're kind of dealing with that right now with my oldest. I mean, he's like, I see all these other friends, and all my friends have cell phones, and they're like, well, why can't I have one? And then even to the point where my parents, who, if my dad listens to this podcast, sorry, Dad, I'm about to talk bad about you for a minute, and it's like and my parents will tell me, they're like, well, they've got to know how to learn and work the technology, so they've got to be able to have a cell phone, and I'm like, no. So listen to what Blue said earlier, because that really puts it into a perspective to make you stop and kind of think about what actually they're going to access, you know?
Yeah. Well, and then also to the argument, which I've heard that before, about, well, they need to know how to work the technology. Y'all, it's called a smartphone. Like, literally, you can put it in the hands of a 3-year-old and they will figure out how to work it. It's not hard to do. Right. So it's not like your kid is going to be stunted in their mental development if they have not accessed a smartphone until they're 16 years old. So, but I don't know. Like, I would, even waiting until 7th and 8th grade for our kids, I'm going to be honest, I don't think that I would have been able to have withstood the pressure from society. I mean, it's one thing from your kids, but then you also get it from other adults, to your point about your dad, right? But also even teachers. Like, I can remember our oldest child having to stay after class, after school, to copy things down from the chalkboard, because the teacher said, everybody take a picture of this for your homework. And he's like, I don't have a phone. And so they said, well, come back after school is out and then copy this down. And so there's a lot of pressure. So I don't think that I would have been able to. I'm not that smart, y'all. So I'm glad that God had us overseas.
Man, I don't kind of turn into a talk about like cell phones and technology. There's kind of what we went on.
Kind of a pet
But
peeve of mine. Sorry.
Yeah.
well, kind of back to your overseas comment. Do you think your kids, I mean, adapted well to American society in a good way or a bad way? Or I don't, because I mean, I mean, I grew up in the States, so I don't really understand, and this is what I know. But your kiddos, and I know them, like they have both worlds. So when they came here, do you feel like they adapted, quote unquote, to what what it is to be an American? That's a weird question to pose, but I'm just posing it.
I don't. Yeah, I mean, they're kids, so they're resilient, right? They can adapt to stuff. I don't know that we did it in the best way. Like, I mean, our oldest two were really part of the culture. I mean, they were, and it's home to them. Like, Zambia feels like home to them. And so I don't know that we did enough helping them to process losing that homeness to them whenever they came to the States. It's just we tend to think, and kids would go along with this, is, well, I mean, it's so much better in America. You've got grandparents and you got Chick-fil-A, and just things are better. So it's better to be here. But I don't know that was necessarily the case, especially with the older two. But they did have a view of, it's our family against the world, kind of. And we've got a thing within our family where we're the Tidwell Five, so that as they come to the States and there's the bullying and all the drama and stuff that goes on in school, and then there's just the disappointment with life in general, they know that there is the Tidwell Five that will stick together. We told them from the time they're young, there's nobody who's going to love you and care for you as much as we do as your parents. And so we're always going to be on your side, looking out for your best interest. So we kind of ingrained that in them from the time they were young. And maybe that we just did that because we're on the mission field, right? And we're like, okay, look, it's just us, so let's make this intentional. But I feel like that has helped them to adapt, I guess.
I kind of like that, having a family saying. That's a really neat way to put it. That's a really neat way to put it.
We're gonna steal it.
There you go.
You're the gambling five.
The gambling
right
five, maybe. Yeah.
But we're the right five. That's all I'm saying, is we're the
Oh,
right
that's
five.
cool. Yeah, that works.
So.
I guess so. The next question I have for you is, since you have 3 kids, you were a youth minister and you started an orphanage and probably did this with a lot of the orphans. How do you share gospel with those kids, whether, any age, but what's a good way for, say a parent to say the gospel with kids, or yeah, let's go with that.
Well, I feel like, okay, specifically to the issue of parents sharing with kids about the gospel, I think number one, it's going to be exposing them to God's word, because that's going to be the foundation for everything, for understanding. So understanding sin and redemption and God's love for us, all of that comes from the Bible. So making an intentional effort as parents to expose them to the word, and maybe even times where they're able to see you submitting to the word, is going to be a very big part of that. But we'll say it this way too. First, kids love things that they can touch and see and hold in their hands. So object lessons are great. If you want to explain how sin separates you from God's presence, that's something that we can just say, oh, look, you're separated from God. But it helps even if you take something silly like, oh, look, we're sitting around the kitchen table and we're gonna have the salt and pepper there. I'm making this up as I'm going along, by the way. So I got salt and pepper sitting there in their little shaker holder where they're supposed to be. And then whenever someone takes the salt from the where it's supposed to be, then making reference to it, to say, the salt has sinned, or something like that, because it's separated from where it's supposed to be. Things like that. Okay, that might be a silly example, but
I like it.
Yeah.
So that they can see, oh, look, there is something that is happening. Or the dog does something to get in trouble, and so you put it outside, and so then you can tell them, look, we're separating this dog from our presence. This is the way that sin does it, so that kids can see an object lesson and understand.
That's
good. And so something like that. Object lessons are good, but a kid is not ready to become a believer until they have a concrete grasp of their own sinfulness. I think that's probably true of even in adults, that people just don't understand this, is there is no gospel unless we first understand how wretched and despicable we actually are. And on a personal level, like individuals, it's not just like, oh, everybody has sinned, but it's, oh no, Blue has sinned, and this deserves to be separated from God for eternity. And so for kids, it's more just teaching them where they learn about sin, which comes from the Bible, the fact that they are sinners, and then object lessons to see that, but then letting them see grace, So, and even to the dog example, right? Whenever you let the dog back in the house and say, okay, I don't know, It's time for grace. Kids, go get the dog, bring him back in, or we're going to show some grace to that dog. Just something like that, so that they can see, oh, this is something that's incorporated into our everyday life.
Well, I mean, that's interesting, the way to go about it with everyday life and kind of incorporating it to what you're doing, and just I like that. I like that. Not trying to you have to do this, this, and this perfectly. It's kind of like the old ABCs, because I won't lie, I grew up in the admit, believe, confess, and it's like, this is how you have to do it. You have to say this prayer. You have to do it this way. And it's almost felt very, I don't want to say traditional. What's the word I'm looking for?
The cookie cutter
Legalistic,
approach.
right?
Yeah.
Was that the word that was the one I was looking for.
Yeah.
And so I really like that take on, like, especially telling the gospel to kids. That's a neat way to do it.
Well, the way that I'm thinking about it, though, is if you sit down with a child and say, hey, do you want to ask Jesus into your heart? The answer is going to be yes, right? I mean, it's not like they're going to be like, no, I hate Jesus or something, right? So they're going to say yes. And so there is a danger of, and we try to avoid this, of pushing our kids towards making a decision to become a believer, right? I mean, if they're exposed to truths about the gospel and things, they're going to get there eventually. In fact, our oldest was a Christian for 2 days before we found out about it. And he's like, oh, by the way, I asked Jesus to save me a couple of days ago when I was over at Pastor Maxwell's house, and I just walked outside his house, sat down, and me and Jesus had a talk. And I'm like, okay,
all right.
Yeah, so and I even try to do this even in evangelism with adults. It's the Spirit's going to draw people, and so as long as they understand all of the concepts, especially around sin and forgiveness, God's Spirit is certainly strong enough and powerful enough to convince them.
And that's kind of a good lead into another question. So, like, as far as evangelizing adults, what's kind of a good way to go about that? Which that's a very big question. You can't hear me?
No, I can totally hear you.
Yes.
Okay. All right. And then, like, have you, like, crazy questions that you've heard people have asked you, as far as, like, like me and Dustin ran into somebody the other day, and they were like,
oh, that one.
They were talking. He was talking to us about something at the church, and he was like, I do believe in Jesus. He said, but I'm doing this so I can get good karma, so things like that. Do you have any crazy stories of, that could maybe help somebody who's evangelizing somebody else? Maybe,
I don't know how helpful it is, but I did in Zambia one time pick up somebody on the side of the road, because people are always looking for rides. Picked up this guy, and it's a great time to share the gospel with people as they're stuck there. And turns out he was a witch doctor that I picked up. And
nice.
So I'm telling him, I'm like, bro, do you feel like, do you sense the gravity of this, that you're actually, like, you're considered an enemy of God? Like, if you were in the Old Testament times, they would stone you to death. And because I'm very compassionate like that. And he looked at me and he said, no, I mean, the way I look at it, me and Jesus are on the same team. Like, he's trying to help people, I'm trying to help people, and so we're all on the same team. It's no big deal. So it was interesting to me, because I took it to think, oh, everybody's just going to see my view of the Bible and the way that I view the world and stuff. And he was totally out there, kind of like your person with karma.
Yeah.
So it might be helpful to maybe consider how people view the world, in order to present the gospel to them in a way that makes the most sense. I'll tell you just a quick thing right here. In the States, we view things very much through a guilt and innocence kind of paradigm, where you'll have people will say, oh, look, we're guilty before a holy God, and so we have to be forgiven. Someone has to pay the punishment for our sins. That is all throughout the United States. That's how we present the gospel to people here. But that's not always the case, because in other cultures, they will tell, like in Africa, it's very much a power dynamic culture. And so the issue is not really so much your guilt and innocence as much as your fear and your power. So if you're operating from a place of fear, that Jesus comes and he removes fear from you, and that you are now more than conquerors in Christ, that you don't have to worry about the the ancestral worships that are spirits that are worshipped right there. Instead, it's a power dynamic. Whereas if you go to Eastern Asia, those kind of places, it's a shame and honor culture, where Jesus comes to remove our shame and take that away, and instead bestows on us honor. So there's different ways of presenting the gospel, more than just you're guilty, you need forgiveness.
And so, I mean, that's a real neat way to put it. I mean, trying to use that analogy in a different cultural context, it might just go right over the head.
Well, it does. Even for me, I shared this one time with the youth group. Actually, I was sharing it with them, and I said, hey, and I'm like, I'm presenting all the gospel, but instead of using guilt and forgiveness, I'm using shame and honor, right? And so I present what is perhaps the best gospel presentation ever presented to a group of kids. And this boy is tracking along with me. He was about like a 9th grade boy. And he raises his hand at the end and he says, well, Blue, how do you get rid of your shame then? And which is the exact same question of saying, how do you get rid of or how do you find forgiveness, or how do you get rid of your guilt, right? It's the same question, right? The answer is that when guilt was that, well, Jesus has to take that for us, right? But when he asked me to it, I freaked out. I couldn't. And I'm like, well, you get rid of shame by trying your best to follow what God wants. And then afterwards, I'm like, oh my goodness, that's the worst answer, because that's a works answer. That is like, hey, just do your best, and then maybe God will forgive you, right? And that's not, anyway. So I failed in that regard.
That's okay. That's totally okay. Not every time, even from a pastor here, is going to be a home run. A home run.
Oh
time.
no, yeah, I've got a lot of failures for evangelism.
Well, Caleb, I guess we're getting close to the end of our time for this one here. You got anything to end it out, Caleb? Any last minute questions?
Yes. I'll say real quick that last question. What are some different ways people can serve the Lord in, say, their church and their community in the world? You've mentioned, you've talked a lot about missionary work. What are some other ways a lot of people listening that say just, are going to their church and not planning on going overseas? How can they serve God in their normal day-to-day life?
All right. I got 2 things that I'm thinking of off the top of my head right here. Number 1, have kids and raise them and be intentional about it. Have a lot of kids. Have so many kids, you don't know what to do with all of them because they're just bouncing off the walls, right? And then raise them. This is God's plan for evangelism. Like, this is when he brought the children of Israel out of slavery, he told them, he's presenting a people for himself to spread the gospel to the whole world. And he tells them, this law shall be on your heart, and you shall teach them diligently to your children. And that's it. Like, he didn't say, man, you need to develop these missionary strategies and you need to be able to do 3 circles of evangelism, whatever. No, he said, teach your kids. So have a whole bunch of kids and then raise them well. You're not going to do it perfectly. You're going to make tons of mistakes. We've made tons of mistakes. We're still making mistakes with our kids, but we're going to be intentional about it. We're going to pray for our kids, and God's going to honor that. So that would be the first thing I would say. But I don't think that most people are going to have any more kids or something, right? Like, Dustin, Lindsay planning on having any more kids?
I mean, it's a possibility, maybe.
I'd put you on the spot. Yes.
I'm not going to say no.
Is that an announcement? No, I'm just kidding.
It's not an announcement. But we did just buy a large chunk of land with more rooms. So, I mean,
you got to fill it up.
Possibility.
Right? Yes, you got that big house over there. So be fruitful and multiply. Now, for most people, though, they're going to be like, okay, I don't want to have any more kids. Here's what I would say. We don't need any more preachers. Actually, that's not true. We do need a lot more preachers, but they're not out there. I feel like, though, the thing that we need more than anything else is people who will, in their jobs, where they're at, in their communities, in their softball leagues and little dribblers games and all that, be intentional about being the hands and feet of Jesus and loving people and explaining the gospel where they're at. Like, we much more, like, you can only have one preacher at a church, right? It's kind of a weird thing, but man, you can have a lot of teachers, and you can have a lot of carpenters, and you can have a lot of lawyers, hopefully not, but you can have all kinds of like different people within church who are following the Lord. I feel like we have kind of professionalized ministry in the States, where people say, well, we've got a preacher, we've got a youth minister, we got the children's minister, whatever. We're going to let them do that. We've got deacons in our church. We're going to let them take care of that. Well, no, I mean, the gospel is best accomplished when all of us work together. If one part is not working, the whole body suffers. And so I would just encourage people to say, hey, right where you're at, see how you can follow the Lord. You don't have to move to Zambia. You don't have to go to seminary. But you do have to be willing, right where you're at right now, to say, God, I'm willing to do whatever you want me to do where I am.
That's a good one. That's an excellent way to end it right there. So just to summarize for all of you guys listening, Blu said himself, have lots of kids and serve where you're at, right? 2 points right there. Okay, yeah, that one too. Well, all right. Well, thank you, Blu, for jumping in on us and letting us interview you. I know this will definitely not be the last time we interview you. We'll have more random questions and thoughts and comments and a whole bunch of other stuff, but I mean, I've sure enjoyed it. Have you enjoyed it, Caleb?
Yes.
Has Blu enjoyed it?
I enjoyed it, man. Sorry if I talked for too long. You know, sometimes
you're good.
It's the hazard of being a preacher or whatever. You just keep talking. So.
It's fine. I mean, it's no big deal. Like, I've been over here writing down like little things of like timestamps of, I need to put that in the opening. Oh, I should put that in the opening. Oh, he said that in the opening. Oh, that's going in the opening. So I don't know what's going on here, but you said a lot of really good one-liners. I will say that's the line of a good podcast is with their one-liners. And you got them, dude. So all right, well, I guess it's a good spot to end it. So yeah, ending it's just as awkward as starting the podcast sometimes.